So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our headline session on sustainability. Welcome to Open Day. I hope that you'll enjoy the other sessions we have available to you from all of the colleges across the university. My name is Gavin Collins. I'm a microbiologist at NUI Galway. I lecture in microbiology and environmental engineering. And I'm also one of the vice deans at the College of Science and Engineering, where I work on student recruitment. So the topic of this session then is sustainability, a challenge for our entire university community. And I'm pleased to be joined today by four of my colleagues from around the university. Rory Monaghan is a lecturer in energy systems engineering, and he's the director of the BE and ME degree in energy systems engineering. Su-Ming Koo is a lecturer in political science and sociology, and Su-Ming teaches on development and human rights, globalization and international development. Thomas McDermott is a lecturer in the economics of climate change and development, and he's based in the Whittaker Institute at NUI Galway. And lastly, Jamie Goggins is Professor of Civil Engineering and has been the chair of NUI Galway's Community University Sustainability Partnership Board, which has been responsible for developing our recent sustainability strategies for the university. So we decided to have this headline event alongside the other such event, which is the Parents' Talk, so that we could have some feature events that don't sit inside any of the colleges. This is something that straddles the entire university and includes lots of colleagues from all corners of the university. And we had considered a headline event on COVID-19, but we felt that maybe many of our visitors today might feel a little jaded by the coronavirus topic at this point and be a little tired of hearing about it. So instead, the focus, as I say, of this session is indeed on sustainability. And we'll consider what this means to us as a university and to our teaching and research mission, because as an institution, we're passionately motivated by the calls to action and the grand global challenges that are represented by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, toward the year 2030. And hundreds of my colleagues all over the university are working towards the SDGs in their teaching and their research, and the university is developing ways in which we as an institution can lead the transition to a sustainable future. And so my guests here today really are just a small section or a sample of everybody involved around the university, and indeed engineers and scientists and social scientists, anthropologists, economists, public health experts, doctors, historians, geographers are all involved and are needed in the task of meeting the demands around sustainability. So perhaps let me start then with Rory Monaghan. So Rory, you might just maybe tell me a little bit about your research and your research interests to start.
Yeah, thanks very much, Gavin, and thanks for having us here today. I work on energy systems engineering, and that kind of broadly means we work on the networks, the technologies, the practices that are used to get us the energy that we use every day. So whether that's light or heat or mobility or telecommunications, we are working towards making the provision of that more affordable, more environmentally friendly, and more secure. So we see this sort of reflected in the way many countries around the world are planning their post-COVID recovery. You know, there's all kinds of, you know, there's the EU Green Deal has been announced for people who sort of follow the news. The idea is that we're hopefully not going to return to the way the world was pre-COVID. We're going to try and move towards a better world, a more sustainable world. There's that sustainability word, and we'll probably get to talk about what that means to each of us. But we're really focused on trying to get the world off the carbon emitting fossil fuels that we're on now. And the European Union and other places have all pledged to stop carbon emissions by 2050. And what I, as an energy systems engineer, do is try and develop the technologies, understand the technologies, and ultimately train the engineers of the future who are going to go out and build these systems.
Sure. And I guess there's no doubt that we're addicted to oil, right, and to fossil fuels. So there's a huge challenge in moving away. How would you say we're doing? Are we remotely on track, or are you optimistic that we're making great strides toward alternative sources of energy?
Yeah, I strangely am optimistic. You know, our track record isn't one that gives much cause for optimism. Some of the ways we measure, certainly I as an engineer, the way I would measure progress towards these things is what portion of our energy is coming from carbon-free sources. How are our emissions of carbon going? Are they going up? Are they going down? And what are our plans for the future? And if we look at Ireland, Ireland's actually done quite well in recent years in terms of getting carbon-free electricity. We're one of the leaders in the world at wind energy, and you know we all know why that is. It's windy around these parts, but it's so we're doing very well on that. But we're not doing so well on things like getting us out of cars, getting us out of homes that have oil boilers. You know, I, even as an energy systems engineer, I've got a home with an oil boiler in it. It's not, I don't live in the best insulated home. And there are practical reasons for that. It's that it's expensive for me. It's expensive for anyone to move off this. So the reason I'm optimistic is that there are pledges coming in now. Governments, I think, are getting very, very serious, and companies as well. And I think society too have got very serious and have recognized that we need to act now, and we need to act decisively to improve our sustainability outlook.
So there's no doubt that there's behavioral changes and policy innovations that are needed, I guess, to help us along in that journey and allow people like you and I, and perhaps many of the people listening, to change the way their homes are configured and so on.
Yeah.
I wonder, could you tell me specifically though, Rory, about hydrogen? Because I know it's something you're really interested in.
Yeah.
Where are we on hydrogen and hydrogen as an energy source, or what really is this all about?
Yeah, so this is a kind of a big topic in energy at the minute. And I guess I'll preface it and say why, or maybe try and answer why are governments interested in hydrogen right now? Well, there's the European Union and others are sort of recognizing that when we look at our energy use, there's a prioritization that's becoming apparent in making our energy use more sustainable. The first priority is efficiency. If we reduce the amount of energy that's lost, we can make our energy bills lower, and we can reduce the amount of energy we need, whether it's clean or dirty energy. You know, energy efficiency is top priority. Another one is then trying to repurpose waste streams from one process into another. So that maybe might touch on some of the things that you focus on, Gavin. You know, this sort of energy recovery from things that we don't normally think of as energy sources, like waste heat and residues from agriculture or food. Then there's electrification as the next priority. So trying, as I said earlier, electricity has been the one success story in Ireland. About we've managed to get our electricity green much faster than we've got our other uses of energy, like heating and transportation. So if we can increase the number of heat pumps, increase the number of electric vehicles, we can get more electricity used, and we can get more green electricity into our energy system at large. And then I work on the fourth priority. It's listed as the last priority, but it's the toughest one to challenge. It's what do you do with the things that you cannot electrify, that are just impossible to run off batteries or heat pumps? And so I work on things like, how do we get the carbon out of trucks, airplanes, ships, really high temperature industrial processes? And this is where hydrogen can come in. It can be a clean energy if it's made through a process called electrolysis, but because it's a chemical, it's not electricity, it's a chemical. So it's got It's able to burn, but burns cleanly. It's able to fuel big, heavy vehicles, airplanes, ships, in a way that batteries would maybe struggle to for the foreseeable future. So it's kind of seen as fitting in these last crucial, really hard to decarbonize parts of the energy system. So that's why it's exciting.
Sure. So I guess what I'm getting from you is that in any case, there's a mix of different energies that we will need to focus on, but certainly something that you think has to be a priority will be green electricity, because so many of the devices and parts of our lives that we'll think about in the future will rely on electricity. And I think you're right. It does indeed touch on some of the work that I and some other colleagues in microbiology and other similar areas work on in the university. And we are indeed focused on biologically converting, say, wastes and other materials and biomass into alternative fuels like biogas, and perhaps even, again, making electricity along the way, or indeed biohydrogen. So I think perhaps what we're together painting here for our listeners is that picture of there being lots of different options, but the key question is whether it's sustainable, renewable, and whether we're avoiding the use of fossil fuels and instead using alternative materials and valorizing those or extracting value from them.
Yeah, sure.
Perhaps one other thing I'll just touch on, and I'll move on to Su Ming then, is some of the other work that I and some of my colleagues have been doing, and that is around sustainable sanitation. And we've been working in countries like Zambia, Ghana, Pakistan, on the topic of sustainable sanitation, mostly in peri-urban areas, these areas on the periphery of large cities. And these are, I guess, often zones where there's migration of people from rural areas toward the cities, but many get trapped in this periphery or this peri-urban area outside the metropolis. And there they find themselves in unplanned, what are considered illegal settlements, where they have very little power and few rights and no or very little access to electricity and running water and formal sanitation. So there we've been looking at I suppose what I would call the intersection between public health, because we're looking at sanitation, also even antimicrobial resistance, because there's again no formal sanitation, waste management, and energy. But that this is all wrapped up in a really complicated dynamic that involves lack of access to power and so on. So I wonder whether that would be a good point to bring you into the conversation, Su Ming. And perhaps if you could tell our listeners something about your own interests and what sustainability means to you in that context.
Okay, thanks. It's nice to be part of this panel and to also have the chance to talk with the other colleagues who are working in the area of sustainability science and sustainability solutions. So as you've said in the introduction, Gavin, my background is in international development and human rights. And that's what I research and teach, human rights, human development, whatever that is, focusing development on human people and their needs, development alternatives, what are the different types of choices that humans have reasons to want? How do humans want to live, and how do they consider living well on the planet? I'm very interested in the problem of the historical legacy of colonialism and its legacy of injustice. So I've been working a lot on decoloniality and global activism in this area, and particularly relating to higher education and what we do in universities. So in relation to what we do in universities, I'm particularly involved in this big word, transdisciplinary studies, And that simply means thinking out of the box. It means collaborative, engaged thinking and transformative thinking. So not just collaborative, engaged thinking, but thinking that's for change. Transformative approaches to knowledge creation and learning. I've also been working recently on a few books on how we do research and researching in a time of multiple crises. So of course, we're in the current pandemic that we are all tired of, but also climate crisis, energy crisis, poverty crisis, inequality crisis, natural disaster crisis. So really interested in what living in the world of crisis has to say to what we do as creators of knowledge and communicators, educators, extenders of knowledge. So I'm particularly interested in these, and we've just done a few different books on responding and reassessing to crises and how we research in crises, thinking about care and resilience in times of crisis. And researcher and knowledge, creativity and ethics in times of crisis. And we have a latest book coming out in October with which I've collaborated with another editor, Dr. Helen Cara. She's an independent researcher, and around 120 academics from across the world on qualitative and digital research in times of crisis. So I've been thinking and writing a lot about different types of knowledge and how knowledge and knowledge to transform and change the world are related to economies of life and care and questions of justice and ethics. So I work with quite a number of different overlapping networks of scholars across many different disciplines, but all broadly interested in human experiences of justice and injustice, and what these have to do with what should be sustained in the world or not.
So I certainly find it really interesting that there may be, say, differential challenges around sustainability in different parts of the world, and particularly, say, in the global north and the global south, or developed and developing countries. So I suppose my first question would be, in this post-colonial context, do you think the post-colonial perspective kind of impedes progress in sustainability, or how important is that?
Yeah, sometimes we use this word post-colonial. It sort of seems to indicate to us that we've actually got over things. But the reality of a post-colonial world, a world where colonialism has already taken place for 500 years and more, is that some people in the world live well at others' expense. So we haven't got over it as a world. And so what does post-colonialism mean for sustainability? It's a fundamental question to me for how we understand sustainability, because sustainability has always been a contested idea of what some people want to sustain at the expense of other people's lives, livelihoods, and abilities to survive, and whether they have well-being and whether they can flourish. So that's, I suppose, it comes back to Kate Raworth's idea of the donut economics, or the donut world. And the donut is the safe and just space for all of humanity. And that's the challenge of the post-colonial world, where some humanity has up to now, through 500 years of historical, economic, political, geographical processes, enabled some to live very well, but at the expense of others. And it enables the current generation to live at the expense of the future generations. So decoloniality is also, post-coloniality or decoloniality is also about how can we live in the world, all of us, all humanity, and try to be good ancestors. So live as if we are people who will not be cursed by the generations who come after us for leaving the planet in a worse situation than it is today. And that they will actually, thank us for being good ancestors, that we kept the things that are valuable to them in good working order for their futures to be available, and that we've discontinued bad practices that have been destroying their futures and destroying the planet. Sorry for going on, but yeah.
No, not at all. I think it's fascinating, and I guess it's certainly true to say that we are borrowing the earth from our children, aren't we, rather than, as they say, just inheriting it from others. But really, I suppose, doesn't this also speak to the, say, equity in how we respond to the challenge, and how some countries may perceive that it's now their time to engage in development of the kind that the already developed countries have done, and that there may be some injustice as to, say, cutting emissions and changing the ways we behave and the way we manufacture and so on, so that there presumably needs to be some global agreement on the way forward.
Yes, I mean, of course, circumstances differ for different people in different countries. But there's a story that we've been telling ourselves, but also preaching to others, that what we've done is good and they should be like us. So we can hardly turn around and tell poor people in poor countries that they shouldn't be like us, whilst we are still the best people in the world who have done things in the best possible manner.
Indeed.
So there are many environmental principles, but I think two are the most important. One is a universal principle, so it applies to all people everywhere, and that's the precautionary principle. Don't go and do bad things that you could not do. You could stop yourself from doing. Yeah, so don't do bad things, the precautionary principle. And the other is a more complicated principle, and that's the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. So that is, everybody is responsible, but different people have been responsible for different things. So if your lifestyle and standard of living is responsible for inflicting harm on others, then you are responsible to stop doing that and to reverse some of that. If you've become rich as a result of having a highly polluting and resource wasteful lifestyle, then you have a responsibility to share the benefits of that technology and wealth with others. And I think the COVID pandemic has really brought it to the fore that everybody needs to survive, same as everybody else. That we're all human beings trying to stay alive in the world who care about others and their lives. So this people in the North, people in the South, we're all too different. That really just doesn't wash now in the current situation where we're trying to keep ourselves and our loved ones alive, and realize that everyone really has fundamental needs that are the same: to breathe air.
Indeed.
So, to have clean air, to have clean water, to have basic necessities that can maintain a healthy and safe life. We realize that there is a great deal more universality, despite the fact that we may have differentiated responsibilities. We also have common humanity and common interests.
So at this point, we've heard from Rory and the technologies that he's described, and we've now heard from you, Su-Ming, on the way you're approaching your thinking and learning on these topics. So it would follow, I guess, that it's important that people like Rory and yourself, so-called perhaps hard scientists and social scientists, need to somehow work together to collectively consider these problems. What's your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. And I think one of the best places that we can work together is in the kind of research and education area, that we can create common curriculum, and we can also share from our own research and also share our research with others. So I'm doing a lot more research now and having a lot more conversations and learning more from my colleagues at the moment, I've got a project with colleagues in South Africa, with my colleagues in Africa, and the world looks the same but different if you take your colleagues perspectives into account and learn from them. So this is the idea of learning from the margins to the center, that to become ecological, we have to become non-egological. So it's not all about us, it's about learning from others, and how much we can learn from discussing the things that interest us with the people who have needs on the margins, and bringing that into the center, centering that, and having common conversations about that. I think it's that, of course, we loved having conversations with our engineering friends and our science friends because they focus on solutions, whereas, in social sciences and humanities, we only have problems. So we are always delighted to have interdisciplinary conversations. And I would say decentering those and bringing in our colleagues, the engineers who are working in India and Africa and South Africa and Latin America, but also, in the communities around the university. It's not just poor people in poor countries, but our partners are the people in the communities and the members of the public. And I know Jamie will be able to talk more about that too, because he's been a really exemplary scientist in that regard.
Indeed, indeed. And it's certainly the case in my own experience that I've had frank and honest sociological colleagues who have given out to us for being scientists who just come up with solutions at a whiteboard whilst they're thinking about other contexts. And I think it's incredibly important that we work together. And indeed, the Rhine Institute in the university is the place where many of us tend to meet together, and it's this breeding ground for lots of interdisciplinary work around sustainability in the university. So at this point then, I might bring Thomas into the conversation. So hi, Thomas.
Hi, Gavin. Thanks for inviting me to join in the conversation. And yeah, I'd also echo what Su-Ming was saying about this being a nice opportunity actually to discuss with colleagues issues that we have a shared interest in, and also some of the points you were making towards the end there about interdisciplinarity. And it's quite interesting actually listening to Rory and yourself and Su-Ming so far, and I'm sure Jamie the same, that a lot of the issues you mentioned chime with issues that are of interest to me in my research and the work that I do. So it's kind of great to hear that and to find out more about what you're working on and how our interests overlap.
So perhaps the first question then would be, what is the economics of climate change?
Yeah, it's a good question. So first I would say I'm an environmental economist, and what that means is that I'm interested in both how our activities as humans, our economic activities impact on the environment, but also on how the environment and nature, broadly speaking, influences and shapes economic activity at the macro scale, so for countries and regions, and also our choices and behavior as individuals, so really at the micro level of individuals. Specifically, the economics of climate change is about, I suppose, as I've just explained, it's both about how economic activity impacts on the climate, and we know that it is fundamentally economic activity in the history of economic development based on fossil fuel exploitation that has created the problem of climate change, and that speaks very much to the kind of inequality in the origins of the problem. But also, on the other hand, we need to understand how the climate and a change in our climate will influence and affect economic prospects, economic development, prosperity, people's well-being, people's health, all that range of outcomes that we care about as a society, and how those things might differ across different locations for different groups, across different parts of the world, etc. So the economics of climate change is both about the problem, where it came from, but also about understanding its impacts. And I suppose a third spoke to that is, the solutions to the problem that, economics can help us to inform those solutions, or the policies that will help maybe tip the balance towards some of the technologies that Rory mentioned, and make those the choice that people and the kind of choices that people make about where they live and how their home is heated and powered, how their cars, whether they drive a car, how their car is powered, that all of those things would be somehow shaped or influenced by policy making, which in turn might be informed by economic analysis. So the economics, I'd like to think, is a central part of our understanding of both the source of the problem, what it will do, what it means, what threats it poses, and also how we go about solving that problem.
So when you say it's the source of the problem, what exactly do you mean?
Oh, just that basic point that the economy, it's the economy that has created the problem, that economic activity, burning of fossil fuels and the development that has been built upon that legacy of fossil fuel exploitation is where climate change comes from. I mean, if we stopped all our economic activity tomorrow, we could stop the problem of climate change. But I suppose maybe that brings us on to this point about sustainability, that sustainability isn't just about avoiding doing harm at all costs, but it's about balancing somehow the capacity to produce livelihoods for people to live well, as Suming was saying, and also at the same time to not destroy the planet or compromise the ability of future generations to live well also.
Indeed. And I suppose a question then is, can we possibly grow our economies whilst still being more sustainable, or indeed sustainable, and moving away completely from fossil fuels and living our lives in different ways? And you know, we see many politicians trying to convince detractors by saying that, you know, changing our ways will actually result in more new jobs and different types of new jobs. So what's generally your thinking around that?
Yeah, well, like Rory was saying earlier, I'm also an optimist by nature, but I think it goes again back to this idea of, well, how do we define the issue of sustainability? What do we mean by that? And I think we have perhaps a problem in the sense that we typically think of this sustainability challenge as being the economy versus the environment versus people's health, say, or you know, these competing goals and outcomes that we care about. Whereas my own view of sustainability, and I think the way that economics would approach sustainability, is about integrating those things together. So it's about the interconnectedness between indicators of economic progress, which facilitate higher standards of living, and the health and well-being of people, and the health and well-being of the planet, or of nature, broadly speaking. So how do we, you know, can we bring those things together in a framework that allows us, as you say, to assess, well, is this pattern of activity and economic development sustainable? And what do we mean by it being sustainable? So you know, if you go back to the definition of sustainable development from the Brundtland Commission in the 80s, so this is kind of the famous one that, you know, we all go back to, and it says that sustainable development is about meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And so that emphasizes the capacities that people have, the ability to meet their own needs. And then that makes us think in terms of what are the things that we need, the facilities that we need to have, the capital, the wealth, the natural assets, the health of the natural environment, the education and health of people that is required for people to meet their needs and to live well and to live a good life, or to have a high standard of living or high standard of well-being. And I suppose a lot of the work of environmental economists generally is about trying to integrate aspects of the role of nature, natural capital, the role of the environment in underpinning our health and well-being, and underpinning our ability to create a good standard of living. So it's about really bringing those things together, rather than having, say, an economic set of goals on one hand and an environmental set of goals on the other, which somehow end up remaining in parallel. And therefore you get this, what your question goes exactly to the heart of the problem, that, you know, can we have both? Well, if you put them in the one framework and you analyze them together, then you can make those trade-offs explicit, or at least you can try to determine whether the path you're on is achieving both things, higher standards of living and not destroying the planet at the same time.
Mm-hmm. So presumably one kind of technical challenge for somebody like you then, Tom, is how you measure this, and how you empirically measure the impacts of, say, climate change on economics and on the economy.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of my own work is exactly on that. It's on the the economic valuation of the climate, of how the climate impacts on the economy, on societies, on people's health, etc. So to give a few examples, my recent research would have looked at measuring the local economic effects of very large scale flooding that impacted cities around the world. So looking at big cities all over the world that have been hit by big floods and trying to understand how that impacts on economic activity, how quickly they recover, whether or not people return after they've been displaced from their homes, etc. Other research has looked at something actually that you touched on earlier about people being displaced from or moving from rural to urban areas and ending up in those peripheral areas. And my research has tried to understand to what extent is climate driving that. And we find that climate is an important driver of people leaving rural areas and if you like, being displaced or pushed towards big urban centers in developing countries. I also look a lot at flood risk and how our exposure to flood risk is changing over time. And obviously flooding is something that's going to be influenced by climate change. The risks are going to get worse. So I have some research in Ireland that looks at the effects that flood risk has on house prices. So do people actually, take into account whether or not they're going to be exposed to flood risk when they're making decisions about whether or not to buy a house? And in the US, we're looking at how sea level rise and coastal development patterns might interact in the future. So the increasing rate of development in areas that are likely to be underwater, barring very large scale interventions in the not too distant future. And yet we see continued development in these areas. So clearly that's building in future costs there once the seas, as the seas continue to rise.
So I think that's as close to a segue as we'll get to move to a civil engineer then.
Yep.
So Jamie, you might perhaps tell our listeners something about your own research and interests and indeed again what sustainability means to you.
Yeah, so I am a civil engineer, so when Tom talks about needs and needs of people, we're the people, we're the professionals that help fulfill those needs. So the things that we take for granted around us, that's the stuff that civil engineers have been involved in designing, construction and planning, and so on. So the buildings that we're in, the water that we drink, the wastewater that we get rid of, the hospitals, offices, power supplies, the transport systems, and so on. So that's the stuff that engineers are involved in particular civil engineers. And I suppose maybe the emphasis has been more on the needs, what our needs are now from civil engineering, and we've been designing and constructing things to fulfill our needs now, and maybe not considering enough the needs of the future generations after that. And there has been a big change and a big focus in that regard, because there is a huge challenge for us all now to transition to a more sustainable future. Restore the biodiversity and living within the ecological footprint that we can support the planet. So we're about 2.4, maybe 3 planets currently to keep living the way we are. So we'd argue that, I know as an engineer, I and my colleagues have had a significant impact on the Earth where we are now. But we could also argue that we have the biggest influence in terms of the climate crisis, the biggest opportunity to help transition to a more resilient future. And engineers need to show that leadership in there. My work, a lot of it focuses on renewable energy, in particular, extracting energy from the tides. So, we have the tides come in and go out as twice a day. And from that, there's significant energy associated with it. So we can, if you imagine what a wind turbine looks like, you place that below the water. And as the water passes, as the tide comes in, it makes it spin around, it goes out, it makes it spin the other way. So you can extract clean energy from that water. So we've been helping develop the technology for that. So, for example, the largest tidal turbine in the world has just been brought up to Orkney in Scotland. We just finished a research project where we designed blades for that device. They were manufactured in Connemara here in Galway, and then we test them in our lab. So we put the largest load ever. So the load that we put on them is 100 tons. To put that in context, it's about 10 double-decker buses sitting on top of a blade that's 8 meters, so around the length of your house type of thing. And then we also did accelerated life testing, so made sure that it would work over its 20 years life, that it wouldn't fail in it. We also do a lot of work on buildings. So, you know, we haven't been that great at designing and constructing our buildings. And, you know, a lot of work has to be done, as Rory said, in making them more energy efficient, making them better insulation, more airtight, so not all the heat is escaping out through them, and using renewable energies there. So Rory mentioned how the European Union has committed to decarbonising by 2050. To do that, we mean that 97% of our buildings need to be retrofitted. So that's 97 out of every 100 buildings need to be retrofitted. So that's a lot of buildings to be retrofitted. So a huge amount of work in there. So to now meet our current needs, but also the needs of the future, and that's what we do.
Sure. And I suppose I should point out that you're also involved, aren't you, Jamie, in MARI, in the Science Foundation Ireland Centre on renewable energy.
Yeah, so that's a centre on energy, climate, and marine. And I suppose it's been mentioned here already. You know, the important thing is that engineers will not solve the problem on their own. Scientists won't solve the problem on their own. Economists won't solve the problem on their own. Social scientists won't. We all have to work together, and it's only by working together to try and, you know, head on these challenges and come up with solutions. That's how we're going to make progress. So, you know, working in silo in there. So I suppose that's why our, you know, degree programs here in the university recognise that. And even though you might pick a certain degree program, during that degree, then you should have interactions with other people in there. And that's why I suppose, you know, not just through the classroom, but outside the classroom and all the extracurricular stuff, societies and so on, they're brilliant to get involved, and you get so much rich ideas and experiences as a result of that.
The other thing I just wanted to speak with you about as well, Jamie, is your involvement with Cusp, the university's Community University Sustainability Partnership Board. Could you tell us a little bit about what Cusp has achieved and what you're aiming to do with the new strategy that we now have up to 2025?
Sure, Gavin. Yeah, so as you know, sustainability has been gathering momentum as a core value of the university for a number of years now. So most recently, last year, sustainability was enshrined in our strategic plan, which is 2020 to 2025, as one of the 4 key values. So alongside and definitely linked to respect, openness, and excellence, sustainability is the heart of everything we do. Why is it there? Well, it's there because it's one of the values that came strongly from the students, or it is the value that came most strongly from the students. So I actually think we should have the few thousand students here on the Zoom that actually all, you know, shouted really loudly about how sustainability was so important to them, because, you know, that is the generation that faces climate change most vividly. Our students demand that we leave the world in a better place than they found it. You know, we in the classroom and outside the classroom, because we don't just do teaching in the classroom, but outside the classroom, the research that we talked about, the engagements and so on, all the actions that we do now, you know, we have to be committed to be exemplars for sustainability and climate action. So it's all our responsibility. Just going to give you an idea, I suppose, the framework that we use in the university. It's a learn, live, lead approach that we have there. So the aim is to learn by basically embedding sustainability in all aspects of our learning. So every student gets an opportunity or opportunities to learn about sustainability. The aim of live part, so is that we implement the principles of sustainability throughout campus operations that our communities are involved in. And we understand what that means. So we implement it, we learn from it then, so it feeds back into the learn. And then we lead. So we have to lead, be role models for sustainability, you know, foster partnerships with our community, with the university and so on. And then by, you know, adapting this learn, live, lead approach, then we can scale sustainability, you know, beyond the campus walls and act as leaders in sustainability, not just locally here in the West region, but nationally and internationally as well, globally.
Indeed. And we have a series of targets that we want to achieve over the next several years in all of those areas then. Yeah, yes, there's targets, there's very ambitious targets in there, because that's what we've done. From like one of the big things that we've committed to now in the university is to align all major efforts in the university to the sustainability development goals, targets and indicators. So for any of our listeners here, if you haven't looked them up before, I'd strongly recommend look up the SDGs and then click on the targets for each one. So there's the 17 SDGs in there. So what we said in the university that, you know, everything we do
whether it's in our teaching, our research, our operations, or leadership engagement, is going to be aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals targets indicators.
And I somehow suspect it's a poster that may be in many classrooms around the country, and that many of our listeners may well have heard a lot about the SDGs. And certainly, I would say in conclusion that this is an area that certainly inspires young people, and it's something that we as a university are really looking forward to embedding more and more in our courses. Perhaps just to finish up, what I might do is ask each of you to let our visitors know perhaps through which courses or programs they might ever get to meet you or sit in one of your classrooms. Rory?
Yeah, I guess all engineers would get to see me, but if you want to see lots of me, see and experience lots of what I was talking about today, it's Energy Systems Engineering GY413 is the course code. And I might just make a quick pitch for something that our students do, or something that our students across the university, in addition to the amazing community university sustainability program. Our students also run their own energy society. So NUI Galway is famous for its student societies, on absolutely everything, but we've got students that are interested in energy, sustainability, and the environment. They set up their own society, probably going on 10 years ago now, and it's just going from strength to strength. They organize their own events. They are amazing students, and so people who want to get involved with driven students on sustainability, come to NUI Galway.
Excellent, thanks, Rory. And for my part, students will be able to see me through GY301, the science degree, and by taking the microbiology pathway, as well as in a few more places. Su Meng?
Yep, well, you'll be able to experience my course as an undergraduate in the BA Social Science, and BA Public Policy pathways, and for master's students in public advocacy, culture and colonialism, and gender globalization, rights, and also politics and society.
Which certainly sounds fascinating. Tom?
Yeah, so students will enter economics either through arts or through commerce, and I teach one of the final year BCom modules on Ireland in the global economy. So there's some global issues in there, including sustainability. I'm also director of the Masters in Global Environmental Economics. So that's a master's program which is very much focused on the issues we've been discussing here today. So something maybe to consider for further down the line. But yeah, colleagues in environmental, we have several colleagues working in environmental economics, and people who choose the economic stream will have plenty of options in terms of choosing those modules at undergrad as well.
Oh, excellent, thanks, Tom. And Jamie?
Yeah, so like Rory, I suppose all the engineering students will see me in first year in there, anyone that does undenominated engineering or any of the streams of engineering, and then at different stages throughout the degree program. But the main students, I suppose, that would see me would be in the BE in Civil Engineering, so the Bachelor of Civil Engineering, which is GY402, the Bachelor of Project Construction Management, BSc in Project Construction Management, which is GY410. But I also teach on the Introduction to Sustainability module, which is taken by many different students throughout the campus in there as well. And then I suppose, Gavin, since Rory mentioned about societies, I'll just give another plug in terms of what our students do. We didn't really talk about it, but the community engaged learning, I think, is a very important thing, what our students do in the university. So many degree programs in NUI Galway, the students undertake modules, or a module, at least one, that has community engaged learning. So effectively what that means is that they identify a real need of the community, and then go out and fulfill that real need. So for example, our engineering students would go and look at some community partners and see if there's problems with their buildings, with accessibility or energy consumption or renewable energy or dampness or so on, and then they'd find technical solutions for it, cost up those solutions and give the report into the community partner, and then the community partner we've over 70% of them either implement or plan to implement the recommendations for the students. So these are only a year and a half into college and can have huge impact on the community, which is, this is about learning how an engineer can have impact on the community. And, this happens throughout lots and lots of degree programs in the university.
Sure, and I think that's an excellent place on which to end. Okay, so I'd like to thank everybody. Thanks, Thomas, Jamie, Rory, and Sue Meng. Thanks for your time and for joining me here to speak with all of our visitors to Open Day. So thanks again and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.